and Lebanon. Guterres has been saying that the world cannot afford for Lebanon to become another Gaza. He says that UN peacekeepers are there on the ground working to de-escalate tensions and prevent miscalculation. Well, our correspondent Gabriel Elizondo was standing just a few meters away at UN headquarters. Let's bring him in now. Gabe, the fears of serious escalation are clearly very real indeed, and growing, it seems.
That's right, and I think you saw there from the Secretary General's remarks that he's really putting the weight of his office, if you will, and the weight of his position and his words behind trying to bring any sort of diplomatic ending to this, if you will, any sort of talks that will be going on. He sort of lent his voice to that, and you heard that very strongly, I think, from the Secretary General there. He said further military escalation will only guarantee more suffering, more devastation to communities in Lebanon and Israel, and more potentially catastrophic consequences for the region. He went on to say it is time for reason and rationality. He also, in his remarks, said one rash move, one miscalculation could trigger a catastrophe that goes far beyond the border and, frankly, beyond imagination. And then he brought up Gaza as well, saying, let's be clear, the people of the region and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza. Now, this is Secretary General has been very concerned about spillover from Israel's war on Gaza into Lebanon over the blue line for many months now. In fact, he first brought it up just a week after October 7th. In early October, he stood at that very podium and said he was worried about escalation and how it could potentially spill over the blue line and how that would potentially affect the region and also Lebanon itself. So I think this is something that both privately and publicly the Secretary General has been talking about for a long time now.
Gabriel Elizondo there watching that statement for us at UN headquarters. Thank you very much, Gabe. Well, let's get the view from Lebanon. We can speak to our correspondent Assed Baig. He's in Beirut for us. Assed, can you talk us through what's been happening there on the southern border, the so-called blue line? What have we been seeing and hearing in the last few days?
Well, we've been seeing this simmering conflict between Hezbollah and Israel, a tit-for-tat airstrikes, drone strikes, shelling on both sides of the border. Now, recently what we've seen from Hezbollah are them issuing warnings. Warnings not just to Israel, but the wider international community. The leader, Hassan Nasrallah, took to the airwaves in a televised address, and he said that Hezbollah doesn't want a war, but is prepared for one. And he also talked about the group's capabilities, saying that they have new weapons, and it's very evident that the Hezbollah that we see today is not the Hezbollah that we saw in 2006. It's way more sophisticated, it has more weapons, and according to Hezbollah, they have more fighters. In 2021, Hassan Nasrallah said, and he claimed, that they had 100,000 fighters amidst their ranks. Now, there have been assassinations, targeted assassinations of Hezbollah members. Every time Israel carries those out, they claim it's a commander. And there have been responses from Hezbollah. Now, Hassan Nasrallah also said, and he warned Cyprus, because there's a belief here that Israel could and is possibly using Cyprus as a base for intelligence or otherwise to target Hezbollah here in Lebanon. But the reality is that Lebanon cannot afford a war. Many people here don't want a war. But what Hezbollah is essentially saying is that they don't want a war, but they are prepared for it. And it's a warning to Israel that they have the weapons now and the capabilities that could strike Israel back. So if Israel does start a war, Hezbollah is more than capable of striking back and also inflicting damage.
Assed Baig there with the view for us from the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Thank you, Assed. Well, let's bring in Marwan Bishara, Al Jazeera senior political analyst. He joins us now from Paris. Marwan, as we've been monitoring developments on this over the last few days, we've talked about these threats and counter-threats we're hearing from Hezbollah and Israel. I mean, they might be about deterrence, but surely they also make it harder for each side to back down.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the nature of escalation. Right? In the end of the day, there is an ongoing fight. It's limited, but both sides tend to respond in a way that could trigger, perhaps, as the Secretary General said, a mistake, a dangerous consequence of sort, whereby the war could easily widen. But in order for the war not to widen, I think both sides have been issuing threats to bring about some kind of a balance of terror, if you will, while each side is trying to terrorize the other's population into recognizing that if this war widens, that they will pay a heavy price. Now, the idea of turning Beirut into Gaza, which really began the rhetorical escalation by the Israelis, something that needs to be addressed head on. So when the Secretary General says, let me be clear, we all stop because we really need to listen about what exactly he wants to be clear about. The world cannot afford another Lebanon becoming another Gaza. That's not exactly, let's be clear. Let's be clear, Israel should not be issuing threats about turning an Arab capital into another Gaza because it shouldn't have done to Gaza what it has done to Gaza. So I think the idea that if it has a tit for tat with Hezbollah, it's going to go on and destroy an Arab capital, that's the thing that needs to be addressed. When I hear someone saying, let's be clear that we're not talking about an earthquake. We're talking about the defense minister and the leading generals of a state saying we're going to destroy the capital of another state.
Marwan, clearly we're seeing alarm from not only from the UN there, we've heard it from the EU, from the US in recent days. Iran chose to launch a direct attack on Israel back in April. That was an unprecedented decision then. Given the fears, what sort of scale could a full-blown war actually take on?
Look, it could definitely be dangerous. And if you just listen to the various assessments and declarations, you can really be sure that as in 2006, but double, triple, quadruple that in the sense of Hezbollah can reach cities up to Haifa and north of Haifa. It could apparently block the maritime access to Israel. Israel could destroy much of Lebanon. And so a lot of people could die. In fact, out of the blue yesterday, I was reading a little item in the Israeli press where the Israeli Minister of Religious Affairs, saying that his ministry is preparing for the burial of many Israelis. I mean, when you hear that kind of an item from a government official leading a ministry saying, if there's going to be a widening of the war, we're going to bury a lot of Israelis, you would probably just need to contemplate what does that exactly mean. But none of this is inevitable. None of it is inevitable. This could all stop if there is a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. I mean, why are we continuously talking about the possibility of turning Beirut into another Gaza when we need to stop the bleeding in Gaza? When the United States and others need to start talking clearly, let's be clear, we need a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. The war on Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, Israel's war crimes in Gaza must end. Once that ends, automatically what happens between Israel and Lebanon will also end.
Marwan Bishara, Al Jazeera's senior political analyst there, sharing his thoughts from Paris today. Thank you so much, Marwan.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.